Okay. .710 KURV Talkback, Dr. Gelman, home of the Iron Microphone, streaming live on KURV.com, 1-800-580-8255, 1-800-580-TALK, home of scientific conservatism. We are here to educate the people. We don't go out with talking about inflammatory things or how many babies Kate Midland had, or whatever her name is. Don't you find it interesting that these so-called liberal magazines, which talk so much about robber barons and equality and all that, are the ones that are falling over themselves with this royal family's meaningless children? And compare that with the so-called conservative magazines such as National Review, which never talks about that kind of stuff. Shows you the massive hypocrisy that is in the media today and most of our society. We live in a world of myth. So many are brainwashed to believe the world is flat. And the thing about being brainwashed is that you don't know that you're brainwashed. That's what the whole idea about successful brainwashing. We're going to talk a little bit about global warming. It's a topic we've covered numerous times before. There's always a little wrinkle to put into it. Of course, this deal with Sandy. And have you noticed that anything that happens in the Northeast is just bigger than anywhere else? What happened to them is nothing, but they're trying to steal $60 billion of taxpayer money to funnel into Democrats' strongholds of New York and New Jersey and other places of serfdom. And it's just amazing how the government takes the taxpayer dollars from the rest of the nation and funnels it into these losers such as New Jersey, New York, and California. But that's what the system is all about. It's about taking away money from the producers and handing it over to the parasites. That's why government exists. And the reason the government is so enamored with parasites is because the biggest parasite that ever existed is government. Government produces nothing, can only consume, and has about one purpose: to make as many individuals dependent upon government as possible, because that is how government derives power, by making as many people, as many citizens, serfs and slaves as possible. And that is what this government is all about. Let's take a look at global warming a little bit. They talk about the hottest temperatures ever. And the thing is, what people need to realize is the calculations that are done in order to determine these false numbers coming out from government are not actual temperature readings. They are calculations of temperature readings and using multiple factors, skewing the answer to what they want. But if we look at raw data, what do we find? In the United States, which is the most accurate temperature readings in the world, and for quite some time, we noticed that in every individual state of the Union, the hottest temperatures ever recorded in the Union were prior to the year, well, at least in 33 of the 50 cities, the highest temperatures ever recorded in those states was before 1950, some even before 1900. And not a single highest recorded temperature is after the year 2000. They talk about hurricanes, because now that the global warming is shown not to be true, they're changing the terminology to climate change. And one of the things they look at is, they say, the number of hurricanes. But I guess no one really bothers to look up the number of hurricanes, do they? Well, it turns out that the greatest number of hurricane-level storms in the Atlantic was in 2005 with 8. Now, that's relatively recent, that's true, but the next highest at 7 was in 1950, a long time ago, and certainly there's much more exposure to combustion of fossil fuels now than there were in 1950. There were 6 major hurricanes in 1887. Which is the third highest on the list. So the question is, what evidence do we have that there's a significant alteration in trends in the levels of hurricane? Well, none. Let's take a look at the melting of the polar ice cap. The Great Lakes of Northern America were created through the receding of glaciers. That happened 10,000 years ago, long before the invention of the internal combustion engine. So basically we have a bunch of myths and lies and other things which the government promotes for its own for its own self-interest of enslavement. But let's take a look at the science of global warming. What actually is global warming? Well, global warming is the greenhouse gas effect. Now, what is the greenhouse gas effect? It is the property in atmospheres that allows the retention of warmth closer to the surface of the planet, which allows life to exist in our case. Without an atmosphere, such as in the moon or on Mercury, there is no buffering effect of an atmosphere, and so the temperatures have wide swings on an average day. On the moon, for example, the average temperature swing is over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. On Mercury, which is much closer to the moon, which is much closer to the sun than is the moon, there's a 1400 degree average temperature variance. Excuse me. But what is noticed is that where there is no atmosphere, though the high temperature of the day may vary significantly because of relationship to the sun, the evening temperatures are the same. For example, Mercury, without an atmosphere, the high temperature in the day is 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and at night is minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the same temperature that is found on the moon, minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit, because in space, the low temperature is, if there's no atmosphere, is independent of relationship to the sun. And so all the planets will have the same low temperature, those planets without an atmosphere. However, planets with an atmosphere will have a greenhouse gas effect. And what is the greenhouse gas effect? That is that molecules, which is what an atmosphere is made of, is molecules. Molecules, when struck with an energy source, such as the radiant energy of the sun, will absorb that energy and increase their activity. Molecules want to remain at the lowest level of energy as is possible, and so therefore when they get increased energy, when they absorb increased energy, they try to eliminate it in any way they can. One way they eliminate it is through electromagnetic radiation. Electromagnetic radiation is, among other things, is light. What we perceive as light is simply electromagnetic radiation, which appears to us as light. One form of electromagnetic radiation is infrared rays. The human eye cannot discern infrared rays, though there are some animal life that can. Of course, they have the special night goggles in which you can see, so to speak, living things, because it can pick up the electromagnetic radiation in the wavelength of infrared rays. Infrared rays is heat, such as electromagnetic radiation can be light. It also can be another form called heat in the infrared range. It is infrared that produces warmth. So what happens is that molecules absorbing energy radiate that energy, and that is and it can radiate it in various levels of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the part that comes out as infrared rays is what we perceive as warmth, as heat. And so the temperature of any region is the average molecular activity. That is what temperature is. Now, in outer space, going up 100 or 200 miles above the Earth's atmosphere, the radiation level is identical to the surface. In other words, the radiation emitted from the sun is equal in the middle of space as it is on the Earth's surface. But why is it so cold in the middle of space when it is so warm on the Earth's surface? And the reason is that in the middle of space there are no molecules to absorb the radiation. And so therefore, since heat is dependent upon molecular activity, if there are no molecules, there is no heat. As you get closer to the Earth in the atmosphere and the molecular buildup increases, then the more molecules there are, the more molecular activity there is, and the greater the heat. The Earth's atmosphere is full of molecules, and the closer to the surface, the greater the molecular concentration. And of course, on the Earth's surface, the concentration gets even greater. For example, if you're on a sandy beach on a hot day, it's always hotter on the sand than it is in the air, which is why it is so hot to walk on the sandy beach. And that is because sand has a higher concentration of molecules than the atmosphere immediately above it. So so more molecules are there to absorb more energy and therefore emit more heat. That is why the sand is so much hotter than the atmosphere immediately above the sand. And so it is molecular activity that requires heat, that produces heat. On the moon, where there are no molecules in the atmosphere, there is no heat, but the planet itself, of course, is concentrated, and so the heat of the moon or of Mercury is the heat emitted from the surface itself and not the atmosphere above it. The reason that it cools down so much at night is because the atmosphere above it cannot absorb the heat being released from the surface, and therefore the temperatures go down very rapidly. The buffering effect of the molecules in the atmosphere above a surface absorb radiation, which tends to decrease the amount hitting the surface. Therefore, the surface does not get as hot. And at night, when the radiant energy disappears from the sun, then the radiation of heat from the surface escapes. Where there's no atmosphere, the temperatures go down very rapidly. Where there is an atmosphere, there's a buffering action, and the atmosphere above absorbs the radiant energy now coming from the surface, increasing the molecular activity in the atmosphere, increasing the temperature of the atmosphere, thereby causing a buffering effect. That is the greenhouse gas effect. And so the greenhouse gas effect has two effects. It's not just a question of keeping the surface warm, it also tends to keep the surface cooler. If you look at the moon, which is much closer, which is in the same geographic region as Earth, the daytime temperature goes up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit, certainly much hotter than any place on Earth. The reason is that the radiation from the sun hits the Earth's atmosphere and is absorbed by the molecules, therefore decreasing the amount of radiation energy hitting the surface. Therefore, the surface of the Earth does not get as hot as on the moon, which has no buffering effect in the atmosphere above it because there's no atmosphere. And so, really, the effect of the greenhouse gas effect is much better measured in the evening when the radiation from the sun goes down. The amount of radiation absorbed during the daytime varies because of the axis of the Earth or atmospheric conditions or many other reasons that will alter the daytime temperature. So it's very hard to get a good gauge of the atmospheric effect during the daytime temperature because there's so many factors involved. However, at night, there's really only one factor involved, and that is the atmosphere above. And so the true accurate measurement of the greenhouse gas effect is not to measure the high during the daylight, it's to measure the temperatures at night when the effects of the sun's radiation have dissipated. The fact that the environmental hysterics do not measure their temperature readings at night, but in the daytime, the highest daytime temperature versus the lowest evening temperature, shows you the fraudulent nature of the environmental hysterics involved with this greenhouse gas warming effect. The far more accurate assessment of the greenhouse gas effect would be in how low the temperature gets at night. If the evening temperature lows in a region are gradually increasing over time, then you might say there is some kind of general warming trend. Now, of course, this would be due to the greenhouse gas effect. However, the temperature trend, these effects may be independent of what man does. Just because the Earth may be getting warmer, and there's no evidence that it is, but let's say that it is, or that it was, it is well documented that the average temperature on the Earth has had significant variations throughout the Earth's existence. At sometimes during the Earth's existence, the temperatures were much cooler than it is now, and were also much warmer than it is now, independent of any man's activities, because man was not around. Or even if man was around, he didn't have the means to add the emissions of fossil fuels into the environment. So let's take a look at some of the planets to show you the real greenhouse gas effect versus the lies by the environmental lobbyists. There are greenhouse gas effects on planets other than Earth's, and we're going to look at Venus and we're going to look at Mars. Let's look at Mars first. Mars has a rarefied atmosphere compared to the Earth's. The Mars average temperature variance is about 150 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the Earth's average temperature variance of about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So on Mars, the high temperature of the day may be about 60 degrees, and at night it drops down to about 80 or 90 below, 100 below zero. So the average temperature varies about 150 degrees. Now, interestingly, even though Mars is further away from the Sun and the Sun's radiant energy than is either Mercury or the Moon, the evening temperature of Mars is a higher level than either the Moon or Mercury, both of which on Mercury and the Moon are about 300 degrees below Fahrenheit, and on Mars about 100 degrees more or less below Fahrenheit. Why does Mars have a warmer evening temperature? Because unlike Mercury and the Moon, Mars has an atmosphere. Interestingly about Mars' atmosphere is that even though it is 1/60th as dense of that of Earth's, that 99% of Mars' atmosphere consists of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas in question. In fact, there is so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of Mars that the greenhouse gas concentration on Mars, even though its atmosphere is rarefied compared to Earth's, the greenhouse gas concentration on Mars is actually far greater than it is on Earth. In fact, Mars' concentration of greenhouse gas molecules is 1.7 times, or 70% more than that of Earth's. Furthermore, since carbon dioxide is the predominant greenhouse gas in Mars' atmosphere, unlike Earth's, in which the predominant greenhouse gas is water vapor, Mars has 40 times the concentration of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere than does the Earth's. So the question arises, if Mars has a greater greenhouse gas concentration and a much greater carbon dioxide concentration, why is its greenhouse gas effect less effective than that of Earth's? And the reason is that carbon dioxide is a weak greenhouse gas molecule compared to water vapor. If we go to Venus, Venus's day temperature and night temperature are identical, and that is because the atmosphere is so thick that no heat can escape. Mars' atmosphere is 90 times greater than that of Earth's, and its greenhouse gas effect, the greenhouse gas molecular concentration, is about 20,000 times or more that of Earth's, and its carbon dioxide concentration is about 200,000 times that of Earth's. The concentration is so great that no heat escapes at night, so that Venus has a constant day to evening temperature. So let's take a look at why carbon dioxide is a weak greenhouse gas molecule. The greenhouse gas effect is not due to atoms. it is due to molecular structure. An atom is the smallest component of an element. The oxygen element or the nitrogen element is made up of one atom. A bunch of those atoms coming together to form or two of them to come together to form a molecule, a molecular structure. It is the molecular structure of a greenhouse gas which determines its greenhouse gas effect, and not the atoms that make up the molecular structure. And here's a perfect example. The oxygen molecule, which is made up of two oxygen atoms, has no greenhouse gas effect. The nitrogen molecule, which is made up of two nitrogen atoms, has no greenhouse gas effect. And that is because the oxygen molecule and the nitrogen molecule are symmetrical molecules. It is the relative asymmetry of a molecular structure which determines its relative greenhouse gas effect. If you take two nitrogen atoms and add an oxygen atom, you form the nitrous oxide molecule. Now, even though the nitrogen molecule has no greenhouse gas effect, and the oxygen molecule has no greenhouse gas effect, when you combine the nitrogen atoms to the oxygen atom, you form the nitrous oxide molecule, which does have a greenhouse gas effect, illustrating that it is the architecture of the molecule and not the atoms that make up the molecule which determine how effective is the greenhouse gas effect. Now, water vapor is more effective than carbon dioxide for its greenhouse gas effect. Why is that? Because the carbon dioxide molecule is a linear molecule and symmetrical, whereas the water molecule is a pyramid structure and therefore less symmetrical, more asymmetrical, and a greater greenhouse gas effect. What is the evidence? How can we measure the relative greenhouse gas effect of carbon dioxide to water vapor? Well, molecularly, this is how we can do it. There's a property called specific heat. Specific heat is simply how much energy it takes to increase a certain amount of substance, a certain amount of degrees in temperature. For example, water. To raise the temperature of water 1 degree centigrade requires 1 calorie of energy. That is called its specific heat, and that changes the temperature of a substance. But there's another thing that can happen to a substance if it absorbs heat. It can undergo what is referred to as a phase change. Now, a phase change means you have a substance, and it can be in either solid, liquid, or gaseous form. It is the same molecules, but the distance between molecules is different, which causes a phase change. So water, for example, can be in the form of ice, liquid, or gas. Interestingly, water on Earth, in relation to all the other greenhouse gas molecules, and most molecules for that matter, exists in nature in all three forms. It exists as ice, it exists as liquid, it exists as gas. Carbon dioxide only exists in the gaseous form. It does not exist naturally in either the liquid or the solid form. This is important because the energy required to change the phase of a substance is vastly greater than the energy required to increase its temperature. For example, with water, as we have stated, to increase the temperature of water, liquid water, 1 degree Fahrenheit, 1 degree centigrade requires 1 calorie of energy added to raise it 1 degree centigrade. However, in order to increase the energy of liquid water enough to change it from liquid phase to vapor phase, each gram of liquid water to convert to 1 gram of vapor, requires 540 calories. Who is? Rachel. Requires 540 calories of energy, certainly far more significant. So when radiation energy from the sun strikes the Earth's atmosphere and strikes the water vapor, the liquid water in the atmosphere, or the liquid water in the surface, converts into vapor. That requires an enormous amount of energy. But the other important thing associated with that is that even though the phase changes from liquid to vapor, the temperature does not change. Therefore, huge amounts of liquid water can change to vapor and without any temperature change. We're going to continue with this when we come back after this short commercial break. 7 KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Thank you for listening. We'll be back after this break. We're back. 710 KRV, Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman, home the iron microphone, cutting through the garbage that passes for policy making in this brainwashed society in which we live in. We're talking about the greenhouse gas effect and how the hysteria associated with the combustion of fossil fuel causing climate change or temperature increase is a bunch of garbage. And there's an ulterior motivation for it, which we'll get to if we have a chance. But now we're going through the science. And so, whereas it requires 1 calorie of energy to raise 1 gram of liquid water 1 degree centigrade, it requires 540 calories of energy to change 1 gram of liquid water to vapor water, and without a change in temperature. Therefore, it takes 540 times more energy to do that. To change liquid water to vapor water. Now, carbon dioxide does not have that effect because carbon dioxide does not exist in liquid form or solid form on Earth, and therefore it doesn't have that property of phase change, which interestingly is actually far more important the far more important effect than the absorption of the specific heat of a substance. So, whereas on Mars 99% of its atmosphere, and on Venus 99% of its atmosphere produces its greenhouse gas effect, Earth atmosphere has only 1% of its molecules, which are greenhouse gas molecules, predominantly water, which is 95% of that 1%, and then carbon dioxide, which is 4% of that 1%. So water vapor absorbs far more than is absorbed by carbon dioxide, and also water vapor is 10 times more prevalent in the Earth's atmosphere. Water vapor molecules are 10 times, the mass of water vapor molecules in the Earth's atmosphere are 10 times more prevalent than carbon dioxide molecules. That means for every calorie of heat absorbed by carbon dioxide, the water vapor absorbs 5,400 calories. But there's another component which needs to be addressed, and that component is that 97% of the carbon dioxide molecules located in the Earth's atmosphere are produced by nature, natural causes, assuming that man is not considered part of nature. 97% is is produced by nature. How? Through the normal metabolic processes of all living things. All living things, including human beings, produce in the metabolic process carbon dioxide. We are all carbon-based. The predominant source of carbon dioxide, interestingly, is in the breakdown of once living organisms which have passed on. That accounts for the bulk of carbon dioxide in the environment. In other words, when a plant or animal dies, it is decomposed through the processes of bacteria and fungi, which in the decomposition process break down the carbon chains in the organic life form or once living life form, and then in that process emits carbon dioxide into the environment. So 97% of the carbon dioxide in the environment, in the atmosphere, comes from the natural metabolic processes which man has no control over. Therefore, the 3% of carbon dioxide which is produced by man's combustion of fossil fuel in the atmosphere, that amount only absorbs for every calorie of heat absorbed by man-produced carbon dioxide, water vapor absorbs 170,000 calories of heat. So the vast majority, so if you count in the natural carbon dioxide, what is formed by nature, you have about 180,000 calories of heat absorbed by water or natural substances for every calorie of heat absorbed from the carbon dioxide produced through the combustion of fossil fuels. So if you eliminated all combustion of fossil fuels, if you eliminated 100% of the combustion of fossil fuels, in other words, put man back into the caves and into the trees, you would reduce the absorption of heat on Earth 1 calorie for every 180,000 calories. No significance. To go a step further, the environmentalists want us to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 20%, or reduce the amount of man-produced carbon dioxide 1 molecule out of every 5. 1 molecule of man-produced carbon dioxide absorbs for every calorie that man-produced carbon dioxide absorbs. Water vapor absorbs 900,000 calories. Therefore, the reduction of 1 molecule of carbon dioxide for every 5 molecules that man produces would reduce for every 900,000 calories of energy absorbed, it would reduce that by 1 calorie. Is that not completely absurd? Now, on Earth, the effect of water vapor is really, interestingly, pretty well documented. You always hear the movies or someone talking about how cold it gets in the desert, even though it's so hot in the daytime, how cold it gets at night. Why does it get so cold? Because the relative amount of water vapor above the desert, because it's so dry, is much smaller than over a humid area such as New Orleans, for example. And so that is why the desert gets so hot in the daytime and so cold at night relative to another region on Earth which is exposed to the same level of radiant sun's energy. The radiant sun's energy coming through the desert sky is less absorbed because the atmosphere has less energy absorbing molecules. However, at night, because when the surface radiates that heat back into the atmosphere, because the atmosphere above the surface is rarefied, much more heat escapes than it does in an area that's humid. That is why a humid region like New Orleans will be cooler in the daytime and warmer at night than, let's say, Death Valley, even though they both receive similar amounts of radiant energy from the sun. And so we can see even on Earth, even with the relatively small differences in greenhouse gas concentrations above in the Earth's atmosphere, remember that greenhouse gas is primarily water vapor, you will still see variances in the greenhouse gas effect on Earth because of the variances in water vapor, to show you how significant water vapor is as a greenhouse gas molecule, how its effect that we can all notice even on the planet Earth. Now, one of the things the environmentalists go haywire about is this so-called tipping effect. Now, what is the tipping effect? Well, let's go to Venus, which has already undergone the tipping effect. Now, you must remember that Venus has 9,000 times greater concentration of greenhouse gas molecules in its atmosphere. The Venus has so much greenhouse gas molecules in its atmosphere that no heat can escape at night. And so what happened was, sometime in the distant past, the average evening temperature kept increasing, and the daytime temperature kept increasing because the daytime radiation adds to what's left over in the evening. And as the evening temperature kept on increasing, the beginning of the daytime temperature started from a higher level, and so that every day or over time, it ratcheted up until the daytime and the evening temperatures became equal, I guess because there's a certain maximum amount of temperature that the surface could reach. In the case of Venus, it's something like 1,000 degrees. It's like 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, both daytime and evening temperatures. Now, when is that tipping effect, what the environmentalists are so hysterical about? Because what they're saying is eventually we will get to the tipping effect where there's enough greenhouse gas concentration that the evening temperatures will be higher, and then the daytime temperatures will be additive, and we'll have a cascading effect where we keep increasing the temperature until we burn ourselves to a cinder. Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the tipping point. Now, we know that Mars has 70% more greenhouse gas molecules than Earth, and 40 times the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Its greenhouse gas effect is less effective than that on Earth's. Mars' daily variance in temperature is about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Earth's daily variance is about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, the greenhouse gas effect on Earth is greater than that on Mars, even though Mars has a greater greenhouse gas concentration. The difference is that the majority of greenhouse gas molecules on Earth is made up of water vapor, whereas on Mars it is made up of carbon dioxide. And so, in order to reach the level of Mars greenhouse gas, to reach the level of Mars greenhouse gas concentration, Earth's greenhouse gas concentration will have to increase by 70%. We must remember that Mars' greenhouse gas effect is less effective than Earth's because of the differences in the makeup of the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide versus water vapor. So the only greenhouse gas effect that the only greenhouse gas concentration a man can affect of any significance is carbon dioxide. Therefore, it would require a 70% increase in the molecular concentration of greenhouse gas molecules on Earth's atmosphere, which would mean 7,000 per million more carbon dioxide molecules in the Earth's atmosphere. 7,000 per million. Right now, the Earth's atmosphere is about 400 parts per million carbon dioxide. You would have to increase that to 7,000 parts just to get to the level of Mars. So that means an increase of about 15 times. Now, on the other hand, only about 12 of those 400 molecules of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere are made by man. So that would mean that man would have to increase the production of carbon dioxide 600 times. 600 times in order to reach the concentration of greenhouse gas molecules on Mars, which is less effective than the greenhouse gas effect on Earth. Let's put that aside for a second. That means that the increase in carbon dioxide production by man on Earth would have to increase anywhere from 15 to 600 times its present level. 15 to 600 times just to get to the level of Mars, and Mars, which has less effective greenhouse gas than Earth does now. Is that possible? No, it is not possible. Man cannot increase industrialization anywhere near enough to reach that level, which even if that level was reached, would not be enough to alter the temperature on Earth to any significant degree. Therefore, what we have shown, looking at climate change with hurricanes, looking at temperature with the highest temperature in the United States and other parts of the world, with an examination of the molecular basis of the greenhouse gas effect, of the differences between the effectiveness as a greenhouse gas between carbon dioxide and water vapor, on the effect of phase change and how much more important that is than a specific heat, which carbon dioxide is the only effect it has is specific heat, whereas water vapor has specific heat and phase change. And we see all that, we can see that it is completely nonsensical and absurd to believe that man could have any effect with his or her combustion of fossil fuels, could have any effect whatsoever in the temperature or the climate of the Earth. One other little thing, the combustion process, the products of the combustion process with the combustion of fossil fuels is essentially the same with natural metabolic processes, with the release of carbon dioxide. The release of carbon dioxide, I mean, it's the same thing. The carbon dioxide released from the combustion of fossil fuels. Remember, what are fossil fuels? Fossil fuels are compressed organic material. The same organic material which undergoes decomposition every single day. The compressed organic material, which is oil and coal, is nothing more than organic material that was not decomposed millions of years ago by bacteria or fungi, was compressed into high energy forms we call coal and oil. The combustion of coal and oil the carbon dioxide released from the combustion of oil and coal is absolutely identical as the carbon dioxide released from the metabolic processes of human beings and every other life form is exactly the same. The breakdown of organic materials releasing carbon dioxide, from which most of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere comes from, the breakdown of that carbon dioxide released is identical in every way to the carbon dioxide released through the combustion of fossil fuels. Why? Because it's the combustion of exactly the same source, the same substance. So what is the basis of the environmentalist hysteria? As everything else with these frauds, these snake oil salesmen, these government agents, it's money and power. If they can convince the American people that energy consumption needs to be controlled by the government, by the bureaucracy, by bureaucrats, that energy consumption needs to be taxed, that energy consumption needs to be regulated by government, that is their goal. That is their aim. Their aim is to control the productive segment of society and to make people more and more dependent upon the government and the bureaucracy. Most environmentalist organizations, such as the Sierra Club and the WWF, whatever they call themselves, are built on myth and hysteria. It requires myth and hysteria in order to get funding from government, funding from useful dupes and fellow travelers, such as the entertainment industry. Because if no organization is going to survive that says everything is fine, we're no longer needed. The only way the Sierra Club continues to exist, that WWF continues to exist, that many of these other environmental groups continue to exist, is by developing the hysteria which draws funding, both from government subsidy and through private charitable donations. And as long as they can maintain that hysteria, they will continue. They will continue to get the money that they so undeservedly get. And so that is the reason that the hysteria continues. It's all a con game, a bunch of scam artists. The government is involved because it allows them to gain more power over the average individual, to make us all more dependent upon government, and to transfer power from the people to the government. That is the only reason it exists. There's no other reason for it to exist, and that is essentially it. Now, you're not going to hear this kind of talk anywhere else because no one does the research necessary, because it takes a while to explain. You have to sit down, you have to think about it. Research has to be done, investigation has to be done, and that is just so boring. Much more interesting to know if Kate Middleton is having twins. Much more interesting, doesn't take any thinking, just a bunch of blather by the media, bread and circus. That's all it is, and it's nothing more than that. And so those who listen to this program, they can't just listen for 5 or 10 minutes. They have to listen for the whole program, and from week to week. They have to do that because it requires something that so many which so many other things. So it's complete and absolute nonsense. The whole government functions on mythology, functions by the making up of crises, functions through those kinds of means, and really nothing else. And it does so in every issue that it addresses, whether it's not necessarily energy policy. It could be foreign policy, it could be agricultural policy, economics in every form. Look at the hysteria about going over the cliff. The economy is going to go over the cliff. I can assure you, the only thing that needs to go over the cliff is the United States government. The United States government is corrupt. It is enslaving. It exists to increase its own power. The members of government are a bunch of middling intellects that really don't have any idea what that are interested only in more power and more money. And it doesn't really matter what the topic is or what the subject is. That is all that they can. That is all that they can do. It is the philosophy of the divine right of kings, once again being replayed in our nation, a nation that was created specifically to refute the philosophy of the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings, which says that some are born more deserving than others, and that there are those who deserve, and there are those who deserve to get simply by right of birth. Anyone that talks to politicians will realize that they are arrogant, they are self-centered, they are ignorant, they have no understanding on the basis of what Americanism is, or the ideology of the founding of the country, which is based upon individual liberty, freedom, and independence. The government is a parasite. The politicians are parasites. And they are going to, that's who they identify with. That is why they promote parasitism. That is why they subsidize parasitism. Government hates the unknown. Government hates the independent. And therefore, the government will do everything to decrease independent thought. The government will do everything to make individuals subservient and serfs to the elitist class. That is what government is in the rest of the world and in the United States. That is what government is. That is what government always has been. That is what government always will be. The Constitution of the United States was created specifically with that understanding in order to limit the proclivity of politicians, bureaucrats, and government from encroaching upon the daily lives and freedoms of the average citizen. If the individual politician could be trusted to do the right thing, you would not need to have a Constitution. The Constitution was created specifically because the Founding Fathers realized the natural tendency of politicians and human beings. And they knew they would not always be around, and therefore they created a document which they hoped would prevent, or they must have thought would prevent, the nation from going down the path towards the divine right of kings. So what the government and the Supreme Court have done to the Constitution is they've corrupted it, they subverted it, and they destroyed it. Because it was necessary for them to do so in order for the government to get its way. And the Supreme Court, the Congress, and the President have all undermined the Constitution, not just the present government, but previous governments as well, because that is the natural tendency of government. That is the way they normally behave. That is why the Constitution is not taught in school. That is why the Declaration of Independence is not taught in school. And that is why they talk about the malleability of the Constitution, which was never meant to be. Thanks for listening. 7th and KRV. Be back after this short break. 7th and KRV. Talkback, Dr. Lawrence Gelman. Thanks for listening.